When cartel commander Melissa Lachina Calderon caught one of her men threatening to report her crimes, she didn't just kill him. She cut off his arms while he was still alive. Her own boyfriend was watching on in horror, realizing he could be next. Here are some times cartels messed with the wrong women. January 23rd, 2014. Two pickup trucks force a young woman's car to stop on the streets of San Fernando. Karen Rodriguez watches helplessly as armed men approach her vehicle. The Los Zetas cartel thought they had just snatched another easy target. But what they didn't know was that they just started a war with the most dangerous mother in Mexico. What happened next would become the stuff of legend. A 56-year-old woman would transform herself into a real-life superhero, hunting down cartel members one by one until they learned to fear the name Miriam Rodriguez. San Fernando wasn't just any Mexican town. Sitting on the main route to the United States, its dirt roads and scrublands make it the perfect place for drug smuggling. And nobody conquered these routes like Los Zetas. These guys were ex-military commandos who turned their elite training into a criminal empire. On that fateful day, the kidnappers first brought Karen into her own home, planning to hold her there. But when a family friend walked in on the scene, they grabbed him too and left. The friend was of no worth to him, so they later let him go, but kept Karen. Miriam did what thousands of Mexican parents had done before. She took out a special ransom loan from the bank. Kidnappings were so common in San Fernando that banks handed out special loans just for paying ransoms. Miriam then dropped the money at a medical facility as instructed, and then waited at a cemetery for further instructions that never came. Desperate for any lead, Miriam then managed to arrange a meeting with Los Zetas at a restaurant called El Unior. The man who showed up crushed her hopes immediately, claiming they didn't have Karen, but offering to help find her for a hefty price. And as they talked, Miriam noticed his cheap plastic radio constantly buzzing with voices, and through these calls, she caught what seemed to be his name, Sama. So she paid him $2,000, hoping that this might lead to Karen. But the phone calls stopped. When they finally did reach out again, it was just to demand another $500. It was another cruel scam. They'd made a mistake this time. Now, Miriam had a name to work with. That single word, Sama, would become her first real lead in hunting down her daughter's killers. And that's when something in Miriam changed. She decided to start hunting.
It's sad to see how the government is so corrupted that they let all of this happen and they don't do nothing about it.
But tracking cartel members is not an easy task, and Miriam knew that she had to get creative. First, she had found Sama on Facebook, where she noticed that he posted a photo with his girlfriend, and she was wearing an ice cream shop uniform. With that first clue, Miriam drives 2 hours to Ciudad Victoria and visits every single ice cream parlor in the town until she finds the right one. But just finding Sama wasn't enough. Miriam had to get closer so that she could learn everything about him. So when she came up with a plan, she chopped off her hair, dyed it bright red so nobody would recognize her, and dug out an old uniform from when she used to work for the health ministry. Then she went full undercover, walking around Sama's neighborhood with a clipboard in hand. Pretending to conduct government surveys, door by door, neighbor by neighbor, she would piece together Sama's whole life. The files she had gathered were so detailed, they left local officers speechless, with one agent even saying to the New York Times,
"When she pulled her files onto the table, I had never seen anything like it. The details and information gathered by this woman working all alone were incredible."
September 15th, 2014, Mexican Independence Day. Miriam's son spots Sama in his shop. And one phone call later, Sama's in custody, snitching on his accomplices. This led Miriam to a young cartel member named Christian Jose Zapata Gonzalez. But when she saw this scared 18-year-old boy in interrogation, the mother in her came out. And instead of being vengeful, she brings him a lunch and treats him kindly. This compassion touched Christian, and he later revealed everything he knew, including where they'd taken Karen. At an abandoned ranch house among bullet holes and debris, Miriam finds her daughter's scarf. And after 2 more excavations, they finally found the only thing that was left of Karen, her femur. But Miriam had to go on. Instead of letting her pain get the better of her, she decides to make the people responsible pay. Over the next 3 years, she hunts down 10 more cartel members. She catches one in church, finding him posing as a born-again Christian. Another she would tackle near the border, holding him at gunpoint for an hour until police arrived. Then in March 2017, disaster struck. 29 inmates escaped from prison, including some of Karen's killers. Miriam begged for protection, but no one took her seriously.
Uno fue recapturado, pero uno aún sigue aquí. A raíz de eso, yo también pedí seguridad en lo que este reo fuera recapturado.
May 10th, 2017, Mexico's Mother's Day. Miriam was climbing her driveway on crutches, still limping from chasing down a suspect. A white Nissan truck pulls up, 13 shots ring out, and Miriam is no more. She was found laying lifeless in her driveway, her hands still reaching for that pistol in her purse. But Miriam's hunt wasn't over, not even in death. Her final tip to the authorities led him to a woman in Veracruz who had tortured Karen. Now, before she died, Miriam had started a group called the Colectivo de Desaparecidos, helping other families find their missing loved ones. The group was a huge success, and 600 people joined. Now, although membership had dropped significantly after her death, Miriam's legacy still lives on. She proved that one determined mother is enough to bring Mexico's most feared cartel to its knees. Now, Miriam had fought this war from the outside of the cartel, but this next person on the list will show us how some women choose to battle cartels from within their own world. September 20th, 2015. Federal agents surround Cabo San Lucas International Airport as a woman in designer clothing tries to flee the country. But to her surprise, this fashionable fugitive is none other than Melissa La China Calderon, also known as one of the most feared cartel commanders in Mexico. Her own boyfriend had turned her in, terrified that she was going to him like she did other men. You see, back in 2005, La China was just a regular 20-year-old girl joining the Damaso cartel, one of the many branches within the Sinaloa organization. Now, in the cartel world, women usually stuck to simple jobs like counting money or passing on messages. But La China had bigger plans. Now, she knew in this world that respect oftentimes came from fear, and if men wouldn't respect a woman naturally, she'd gladly make them fear one instead. And so she set out to become this ruthless, violent woman that would make them shake in their boots. But this is hardly a new concept.
There is a tendency for women to be more violent than men so that the men who are around them will take them seriously.
And it worked. By the time she was 24, La China was in charge of all the cartel's gunmen in the Baja California area. This place was where crime was already out of control, but under China's command, things got even worse. Her signature method went on to become the stuff of nightmares. Whenever her men would catch a rival, she would turn it into this theatrical production. She'd have the bodies and placed in front of their families' homes during the night so that by sunrise, the whole neighborhood would see what had happened to anyone who crossed her. And to make matters worse, every kill earned her soldiers a personal delivery of drugs. That incentive made her men compete for who would rack up the highest body count, knowing China would be watching and subsequently rewarding them. And the more brutal the kill, the bigger the reward. That strategy worked, and soon enough her territory became so feared that even rival cartels thought twice before moving in.
Pues a final de cuentas son criminales, no es que deban tener ni admiración ni respeto, pero pues digo, es interesante que...
But everything changed in 2014 when her boss, El Grande, thought China was getting too powerful. So to counter that, he had her boyfriend killed. thinking this would make her behave. But instead of backing down, Chino went wild. She puts together 300 guys and starts her own cartel called Las Fuerzas, together with her new boyfriend, Hector Pedro Camareno Gomez, who later became known as El Chino. And that's when La China really showed everyone what she was capable of. In just a few months, she racks up 178 confirmed kills. Her men, riding on red motorcycles as Las Fuerzas' trademark, became symbolic, and everyone knew that if you saw those bikes, death wasn't far behind. But La China wasn't just brutal to her enemies. Even her own men lived in constant fear of her. This became crystal clear when one day she needed a new car for a quick getaway, so she sent her most trusted soldiers to buy it. But when the car sellers showed up to deliver it, something inside her snapped. Instead of just paying them, she killed both salesmen on the spot. Now that was too much even for her own soldier, because they were just regular guys doing their jobs. Shocked by what they'd seen, the soldier threatened to report her if she didn't stop the senseless killing. Well, that was a huge mistake, because now El Chino's watching on in horror as La China ties up her own soldier and starts cutting off his arms while he's still alive. Then she puts a bullet in his head and had his body dumped in one of her many mass graves. El Chino realized something that day. If she could do that to one of her most loyal men, well, he wasn't really safe either. And he decided right then and there that he wanted out. September 2015, El Chino slips away from the compound and goes straight to the federal police. They're really the only ones with enough power to protect him from what La Chino would do if she caught him. He tells them about the mass graves, the disappearances, and the 178 people that she'd killed alongside her cartel. But most importantly, he tells them that she's planning on leaving the country later that same month. September 20th, 2015, Cabo San Lucas International. La China's walking through the airport in her designer clothing and expensive jewelry, looking like another wealthy tourist heading home. But federal agents were watching. They let her get all the way to the security checkpoint before closing in. And even as they surround her, she kept her ice-cold composure, as if being arrested was just a minor inconvenience in her day. The woman who terrorized Baja California with 300 men on red motorcycles was finally in handcuffs, brought down by the one thing she didn't expect, that her own boyfriend would fear her even more than he feared the cartels. Today, La China sits in prison, facing life behind bars, plus extradition to the US. Her Instagram is still up, showing pictures of her smiling with her family, as well as other photos where she's showcasing her favorite guns. So La China fought brutality with even more brutality. But our next story will show how some women choose to take on cartels with a very different kind of power. November 2020. A young woman in a low-cut top aims an assault rifle at her phone camera. Now she's recording a message for Mexico's most dangerous cartel boss, El Mencho. And while people wouldn't dare as much as to whisper his name, La Cholita's about to call him and his entire Jalisco New Generation cartel a bunch of cowards. Mexico's cartel war had entered an entirely new battlefield: social media. And nobody played this game quite like La Cholita. Now she wasn't just any cartel member, she went by various nicknames including Lucy Cruz or Castillo Hernandez, and worked as a mercenary for both the La Familia Michoacana and Los Viagras cartels. Yet it was her social media presence that made her infamous. While other cartel members steered clear of the spotlight, she flaunted her cartel lifestyle. She flexed it all: guns, money, and violence. But in November 2020, La Cholita went a step too far. After a shootout between her cartel and the CJNG in Aguililla, Michoacan, she found a pickup truck abandoned by Mencho's men. Now, most people would have just kept quiet, but not La Cholita. She films herself walking through the battlefield, mocking how CJNG fighters had fled like cowards, leaving their weapons behind. She even gives a tour of the abandoned arsenal, laughing as she counted the guns they left behind.
Que les deje más cosas, porque les importa más cosas, dice. Que le deje más cosas.
También se le quedó, era el güey. Se le quedó. No, que no les iba a sacar de esta casilla de cajón.
Mira, nomás faltó que dejaran el rifle.
Puta madre.
Puro rifle faltó que dejaran.
But you have to understand, this wasn't just any territory she was filming in. This was Aguililla, El Mencho's hometown. And El Mencho was known for his zero-tolerance policy when it came to even the slightest insult. One source told Rolling Stone magazine,
"This is a guy who'll execute your whole family based on not much more than a rumor. He just has zero regard for human life."
La Cholita's followers watched on in horror as she posted the video. Everyone knew what happened when you mocked El Mencho. You might be found in pieces somewhere, or, maybe less fortunate, never found at all. So just days after posting her taunting video, La Cholita simply vanished, and her social media accounts went silent. To this day, everybody, no one knows what happened to the woman who dared to mock Mexico's most dangerous cartel boss. Some say she's being held captive, but others think she's probably met a fate too gruesome to even mention. And El Mencho's men never really came forward to claim credit for her disappearance. They didn't have to. La Cholita's story becomes a warning about the real price of fame in the cartel world. Behind the flashy social media posts and provocative videos lurked something much darker. A world where even the most fearless could vanish without a trace. But while La Cholita's defiance may have led to her disappearance, some women managed to beat the cartels at their own game. It's 1975, Medellin, Colombia. A woman faces off against her husband in a parking lot, guns drawn. Alberto Bravo had accused his wife Griselda of stealing money from their drug empire. Big mistake. Minutes later, Bravo's laying dead with multiple bullet wounds, while Griselda walked away with a gunshot to the stomach from which she'll make a full recovery. The message was clear. This wasn't just another cartel wife, and all the men dominating the Colombian drug trade were about to learn they'd underestimated the wrong woman. Way before Pablo Escobar was even stealing cars, Griselda Blanco was revolutionizing the coke trade. Born back in 1943 in the slums of Medellin, she learned early on that survival meant being tougher than everyone else.
She lived in a neighborhood that was so uniquely criminal that it had been designated a tolerance zone, which is to say a red light district, by the city. Things that were illegal elsewhere were legal in that little neighborhood.
By age 14, she was already learning the drug trade from her first husband, Carlos Trujillo. But Griselda wasn't satisfied simply playing the supportive wife. She had bigger plans.
She forges relationships with men early on that are beneficial to her economically and then socially.
When Trujillo mysteriously died of liver failure, Griselda quickly married Alberto Bravo, a small-time drug dealer. But where Bravo saw a decent living pushing a few pounds of coke, Griselda saw an empire waiting to be built. So she came up with her most revolutionary idea: lingerie with hidden compartments for smuggling drugs.
They were creating garments. These garments would allow for the drugs to be more smoothed around the body. It would just look like a woman's natural figure.
She then recruits beautiful women as mules, training them to flirt with customs agents while smuggling millions of dollars worth of cocaine. The men running the drug trade in New York never saw her coming. She was moving thousands of pounds of cocaine yearly, building a fortune worth around $1.5 billion. But Griselda's real rise to power came when she moved to Miami in the late 1970s. Now, the city was already a war zone between rival cartels, but Griselda played the game differently. The Dadeland Mall shooting was Griselda's way of announcing that Miami had a new boss. Her hitmen pull up in a van, walk into a crowded liquor store, and opened fire.
They were well armed, we can say that, and they came prepared to do battle.
But they didn't stop there. They sprayed the parking lot as well, hitting cars and terrifying shoppers.
2 men slaughtered In a shower of bullets, 2 others were shot but survived.
The message was clear: nowhere safe from La Madrina's reach. But her real war was with Pablo Escobar himself. While Escobar was running street scams in Medellin, Griselda was already moving thousands of pounds of coke into the States.
Most Americans know of Pablo Escobar.
Right.
Well, she was there before Pablo Escobar on a much larger scale. Pablo Escobar was stealing cars when she was already trafficking 3,400 pounds of cocaine in the 70s and 80s.
When Escobar started moving into Griselda's territory in 1975, he thought he could muscle out what he perceived as just another woman. But instead, he found himself in the fight of his life. Griselda's hitmen were everywhere. They'd strike in broad daylight, gunning down Escobar's men in front of their families. No one was safe. The war between them got so brutal that even the Colombian authorities were shocked. Griselda wanted to terrorize them. She'd leave her enemies' bodies arranged in grotesque displays, with warning cards pinned to their clothes. And her own men weren't safe either. One of her lieutenants once made the mistake of complaining about a payment, and shortly after, pieces of them were scattered across 3 different neighborhoods. His wife and children also disappeared the next day. By 1985, authorities had linked her to over 200 murders, though many officers believed the real numbers much higher. Her empire was bringing in billions, and even the mighty Pablo Escobar had learned to respect her territory. Griselda Blanco had transformed from a small-time dealer's wife into something the cartel world had never seen before. A woman who could outthink, out-earn, and out-kill any man in the business. But power like that always comes with a price. By the mid-1980s, the DEA, FBI, and Miami police had made her their top target. The violence had gotten too public, and something had to give. When they finally caught up with her in 1985, Griselda was living like a queen in California. They found her in bed, reading a Bible, though the gun under the pillow told a very different story. Griselda ends up spending nearly 20 years behind bars for her crimes, and when she finally gets out in 2004, she heads back to Colombia, thinking she'd live out her days in peace. But the cartel never forgets. September 3rd, 2012. Griselda's walking out of a butcher shop in Medellin when 2 men on a motorcycle pull up. A quick burst of gunfire, and the coke godmother was gone.
She is Griselda Blanco, was a 69-year-old mother of 4, seen here in one of her many mugshots. As of yesterday, she is dead, gunned down by a motorcycle-riding assassin as she stepped out of a butcher shop in Medellin, Colombia.
She showed all the guys that a woman could be more innovative, more ruthless, and more feared than any of them. The coke cowboys might have ruled Miami, but for nearly 2 decades, they all bowed to the cocaine godmother. But while Griselda fought her way to the top through sheer brutality, the next person on the list shows how some women choose a more subtle path to power. January 2024, Florence Maximum Security Prison, Colorado. El Chapo, the most notorious drug lord in history, has a new worry keeping him up at night. But it's not rival cartels or federal agents. It's his own daughter-in-law. The woman who married his son, Ovidio, is turning out to be more cunning, more capable, and potentially more dangerous than anyone ever expected. They've even started calling her La Jefa, meaning the boss. But to understand how a cartel wife became El Chapo's worst nightmare, it's important to know how Adriana Meza Torres got her start. Adriana was born in the brutal world of Mexican cartels. Her father was the infamous Raul LM6 Meza Ontiveros, the right-hand man to the now incarcerated El Mayo Zambada. So she learned early on that in this world, family meant everything and nothing. In 2007, she watched her father die in a shootout. Soon after, her brother met the same fate at just 18 years old. Now, most would have cut ties with the cartel maybe after something like that, but Adriana decided to master it instead. Now, when she married Ovidio Guzman, everyone thought she'd be another cartel wife, a pretty decoration for photos, laundering money through beauty salons, as most did. But they had no idea that Adriana was playing a much bigger game. While the other Los Chapitos were making headlines with bloody street battles, she was fighting a different kind of war. Cartels ain't just about muscle, they need brains. And Adriana had both. First, she revolutionized how the cartel handled its billions. While others used clumsy front businesses like car washes and restaurants, Adriana built entire corporate networks. She created companies within companies, with each one looking as legitimate enough on paper that even forensic accountants couldn't follow the trail. And when El Chapo's wife, Emma Coronel, was arrested at Dallas International Airport for amateur mistakes in money laundering, Adriana took notes. She made sure that every transaction had a paper trail, every business had proper taxes filed, and every employee was legitimate in order to never get caught. On the surface, everything looked perfectly legal.
Tonight, Mexican neighborhoods littered with bullet casings as dozens are dead in the wake of Ovidio's arrest.
So everybody's watching burning cars and airport shootouts caused by Ovidio Guzman. And Adriana's in the background with a different operation. Within hours, she had moved millions in assets, redirected supply chains, and ensured the cartel's business wouldn't miss a single beat. The DEA calls her La Arquitecta, meaning the architect, because she's building something new. Something that's making even El Chapo nervous in his supermax cell. Because while bullets and bloodshed kept his empire running for decades, his daughter-in-law is creating something much harder to fight. And here's the thing that really terrifies old-school cartel leaders. She's winning. The parts of the operation under her control are more profitable and attract less heat from law enforcement than ever before. She's proving that the future of cartels might not be in the hands of the most violent member, but the smartest. And while Adriana's proving that a cartel wife could be more dangerous than a cartel sicario, this next story shows us what happens when cartel royalty decides to play both sides of the law. September 28, 2007. Federal agents surround a Mexico City coffee shop where an elegantly dressed woman sips her morning espresso. Now, she doesn't resist arrest at all. She smiles, knowing they've just captured the most powerful woman in the Pacific drug trade. For years, even Pablo Escobar's Colombian cartels had to go through her to move cocaine into the U.S. They called her the Queen of the Pacific, and she earned that crown one calculated move at a time. Born into Mexican drug royalty, she transformed from a 13-year-old girl counting dirty money into the woman who would control the entire Pacific Coast drug trade. And she did it not with bullets, but with something far more dangerous: her mind. Most kids learn about violence from TV, but Sandra got it right in her living room. Her uncle Miguel was already a legendary boss in the Guadalajara cartel. And at the age of 13, while other girls were at school, she was counting stacks of cash for her father's operation. That same year, she witnesses her first cartel shootout, but instead of being traumatized, something clicked in young Sandra's mind. She saw a path to power. Finally, at 21, Sandra made her first power move. She starts dating Amado Carrillo Fuentes, one of the biggest drug smugglers on the U.S. border. She didn't do it for love, though. While Fuentes saw a beautiful young woman, Sandra was learning how his operation was working from the inside. Then she did something brilliant. While other cartel leaders are busy running away from cops, Sandra married him. 2 corrupt Mexican police commanders, one after the other. Now she had what no other boss had: eyes and ears inside law enforcement. It's with this advantage that Sandra built something unprecedented. From the beaches of Acapulco to the mountains of Sinaloa, she controlled every gram of drugs moving through the Pacific coast. But this wasn't enough. Sandra saw something bigger, a connection no one had tried before. She was the first to successfully unite Mexican cartels with the Colombian cocaine suppliers. Even Pablo Escobar's men had to go through her. The amount of drugs and money flowing through her empire was staggering. But in the end, her ambition may have reached too far. By the mid-2000s, Sandra's empire had grown too big to hide, and law enforcement were closing in, forcing her to constantly move between safe houses. As the search was closing in, she kept pushing for more routes, more connections, and more power. September 2007, federal agents find her at Mexico City in a coffee shop, living in plain sight. They expected some kind of resistance from the Queen of the Pacific, but instead she calmly finished her espresso, fixed her makeup, and walked out with a bunch of them in handcuffs. The charges she was facing were pretty heavy: conspiracy to traffic coke, money laundering, and building one of the largest drug operations in history. But even from her cell, Sandra remained defiant. In her first interview after being released in 2017, she shocked everyone by saying her only regret was dealing with the Colombian cartels.
Culpable no, porque nunca le he hecho yo daño a nadie. Remordimiento tampoco, porque yo no he hecho nunca mal. Fue un alivio ser detenida, no regresar a ser santa, a ser detenida, allá no huir. Sí fue un alivio.
In the end, Sandra Avila Beltran's story proves something crucial. In the world of cartels, sometimes the most dangerous player isn't the one with the most guns, but the one with the most connections. She built her empire not through bloodshed, but through intelligence and strategy. And thus, even in her defeat, she changed the game forever.